Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I have got David Botas from the Contrarians. Hey David, how are you?
Doing good, and you?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's all warming up in Sydney for summer, and looking forward to Christmas. As you can see, decorations are up. So, welcome to the show. And viewers, today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about shoegaze. So a genre of rock that I've never covered before. And we're going to talk about one of the pioneer bands from shoegaze. And we're talking about My Bloody Valentine. And that's one of their albums, Loveless. But we're more specifically going to be talking about this masterpiece from 2013, MBV, which was the comeback album for My Bloody Valentine. So just to start things off, talking about shoegaze, first and foremost, if you like classic rock and you like hard rock, this may not be for you. So just to describe what is shoegaze music, it's a blend of indie and alternate rock. It's sort of classified by very obscured vocals. So the vocals are very low in the mix, quite ethereal sounding. Distorted guitars, I would say, David, it would be like a windmill. It's like a wall of sound, huge volume. And I can attest to that sort because I saw My Bloody Valentine and they were one of the loudest bands I've ever seen in my life. A lot of change of tuning mid-song, effects, distortion. It's just a whirlwind of rhythm guitar. David, have you got anything to add? Does that sort of describe what shoegaze music is?
Yeah, it does. To add more to that, it mainly became a thing at the end of the 80s.
Yes.
And it kind of fizzled a bit in the early 90s. If it draws extreme parallels to grunge in America, shoegaze was predominant in the UK. And it's the same years of like basically alternative independent artists. If you look at what was going on in like Seattle in 88, and you look what was going on in like London or whatever in 88, you have shoegaze and you have grunge sort of coming up. One took off and became super popular, and the other one stayed in the shadows and just sort of
fizzled
was
out
there
a little
to to appreciate because it's not because of the quality, it just wasn't accessible and pop radio friendly.
Absolutely. And some of the bands in the shoegaze genre, other than My Bloody Valentine, Jesus and the Mary Chain, which had some traction in the alternative charts in America, pretty well known in the UK. Shoegaze probably inspired bands such as Dinosaur Jr, Nirvana, and Garbage. If you listen to the first two Garbage albums, there's a lot of that whirlwind rhythm, wall of sound, but much more commercialized and not as intense and pushed out as My Bloody Valentine. And to even some modern bands like the Horrors from 2005 onwards, they certainly picked up the mantle of shoegaze music and pushed a lot of albums. They're definitely a band worth investigating. So talking about My Bloody Valentine, so they formed in Dublin in 1983, and you've got the lineup of Kevin Shields, Colm O'Colsick, Debbie Goog, and Belinda Butcher. So they came to prominence with this album, wrong side, but this is the Loveless album, and this is probably the number one greatest shoegaze album of all time. So lots of polls, even lots of polls doing albums of the 90s, because this came out in 1991, rate this is one of the greatest albums of the 90s. It went top 10 in Australia, and UK it went to number 7. So how would you describe it? It's described, as I said before, with shoegaze, with that wall of sound. But going back further, very influenced by the Velvet Underground, maybe a bit of Public Image Limited, David, and a little bit of post-punk. You know, you could even say a little bit of early Cure, those sorts of bands. long spell, and then this came out, which was MBV in 2013. And this was the comeback album. And this was around the time that I saw them when they came out to Australia. So again, mass critical acclaim. The band, if you can say something, it even pushed the whole sound and distortion of shoegaze even further. David, tell me about your first impressions of MBV, the album.
Well, this was a shot in the dark. This was, I discovered Loveless 15 years ago. That was kind of my gateway into indie rock in general. Yeah. So I was listening to, I listened to some of the shoegaze stuff that was still coming out with this. Some people call it new gaze, or the shoegaze stuff that was coming out about 10 years ago. And I remember being online and just finding out all of a sudden there's a new Bloody Valentine album. And Kevin Shields, who's kind of like my Bloody Valentine personified, I guess, like he's really the mouthpiece for the band. He had been promising the album for years. This is the Chinese Democracy, Guns N' Roses of indie rock. This album was just like, yeah, it's gonna come out. Sure, it's gonna come out. And that's what everybody thought. Like since Loveless came out in '91, you never really knew when that next one was gonna come out. Loveless bankrupted the label. It took 2 years to record, and everybody was making fun of it like it was this big Hollywood picture that had gone awry with budget and everything. And then
19 studios, David, 19 studios and several engineers. Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, they found their way somehow. So when I discovered MBV, I was up late at night and it come out, and then I went reading up on it, and they released it on their website. Reminded me of kind of how Radiohead released In Rainbows, like just on their website, out of the blue. Mm-hmm. And I went looking for the songs on the website, and it crashed. This was a big thing in my Bloody Valentine lore. That night, the website crashed because all the interest for this new album. So I found it on YouTube with different tracks, and it was just it didn't seem real. It just, you had to pinch yourself, because it's like they did a new album, like, and it came out of nowhere, and it's pretty much just as, it sounds like it could have came out like in 1994 or 1995 and would have had a lateral quality to Loveless. Loveless is my favorite album of all time, so to not touch it is not really saying much, and a lot of things don't touch it, but I thought this album was just, I listened to it ad nauseum over and over and over again. I think it's my second favorite out of their catalog. So that was my first impression of MBV. Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to just discuss how I thought the theme of this album, especially if Loveless by Bloody Valentine is sort of like it's a very like empathic album. There's not logic and pay attention to the words. You're just feeling things and understanding at that point. The way that this one is different is this is a psychic album. So you got me on record saying psychic album. When this was being originally recorded in 1996, Kevin Shields wasn't trying to make this album. Debbie and Colm had left the group, so Belinda's just out there in the ether somewhere, and he just recorded some riffs and some melodic sections, forgot about it, left it in the vault, and just sort of had a bit of a monastic lifestyle for a while. He didn't want to. He sort of grew up a bit of an environmentalist, and he kind of felt like the world was going in the wrong direction in a sense, and just kind of had a cynical, just sort of like, wow, everything's kind of going to a rut. Yeah. And I think that took the wind out of his sails to record, to keep recording. Also, the budget had went up, and they pulled the plug on the budget. So he went off, and he just was quiet for a while. You heard him in 2003 when he did some stuff on the Lost in Translation soundtrack.
Yes.
And then in 2006, he finally uncovered these little fragments and abstracts. And in 2006, and he's like, I remember when I wrote this down, I had like a very cynical view of the way the world is. It's even worse now. Maybe I'll do something with this. I kind of don't want to make this an album. I kind of want to make this maybe a spin-off or a side project. So a year later in 2007, My Bloody Valentine regroup. They go tour. They don't play any new music on the tour. And then in 2011, 2012, for real, he gets these abstracts again for the third time. And he starts working out the songs in them and trying to figure out what he was doing, because what he says is, I'm paraphrasing, when I came out the other side, it was even more relevant to me than I thought it would be. He thought this was going to be like, oh, that's where my mind was at in the mid-90s. And he wakes up, and basically in 2012, he's in a world where they didn't get praise when these albums came out. They got praise afterwards. Yeah. So these albums never went gold, none of that. They got praise afterwards. So he's in a world where now he's kind of regarded with much more fanfare, and he's still kind of just feeling like, I don't want to engage with this world. It's too like a bit negative. And the three last songs on the album, he said that was particularly like sort of relevant to that feeling. The song In Another Way, he said was that's the track 7, which is the beginning of that third arc. He says that is like recognizing that something's wrong, like but having like almost a stoic answer to it. And the Nothing Is, which is just like the drum bass. He's like, that's where we're in right now, in this like evolution of reality. It's just ominous, and the only light at the end of the tunnel is the Wonder 2 song, which is like the awakening period, the new universe, the age of Aquarius, who knows? Like, that's what this entire album was doing. So he was sort of like, this was a personal journey that he went on like a monk, and he just detached himself from the world. And he looks at this as basically just like an acknowledgement of the end of things.
I came to this whole genre quite late. As I said, my first experience with My Bloody Valentine was actually seeing him live. So you can imagine what that would be like if you're not used to this genre. And, I'm sort of I've been exposed to a lot of genres of music, but going into this concert, come through the doors, and the usher gives you earplugs and a little sort of a disclaimer. You should be wearing earplugs. We don't take responsibility for losing your hearing damage. And I've looked on social media, and there's been a lot of people that have had permanent ear damage with this band, because that's part of the shoegaze, distortion and just putting the volume out. And one thing I want to just quickly mention about shoegaze, how did the word shoegaze? It's they're very sort of anti-showmanship. It's about getting into the music, getting into the groove, and looking down at your instruments. And then, I think somebody made I think it might have been a critic from NME, coined the name. It's just one of these things that have stuck. Looking at your shoegaze and the music stuck with a lot of these bands. Anyway, I saw him live. And it was just really, really interesting just to see that it was basically an experience. So you wouldn't go to see guitar solos or a 5-minute structured song. It's all about the experience of the sound, and what a wall of sound. And, the fascination of the vocals, that they're just so buried. Like, you could be at the concert and they could be singing the phone book, but you wouldn't know. But there are lyrics, and we'll talk about it. After the concert, I was intrigued and, bought some albums. So this was their second one, My Bloody Valentine, which is it doesn't sound like Loveless. It still has that lot of structure. And another thing about My Bloody Valentine, if you take away the distortion and you take away the extreme way it's mixed, strip it back, a lot of those songs sound like Velvet Underground on the melodies. So there is that classic kind of rock structure to their songs, but it's put through a prism and it's distorted. And that's what makes this band very special or unique, depending on your point of view. So I discovered that, and of course, this little beauty here, and the rest is history. And I got sold, and it's been in high rotation ever since. So, as I said, it's a genre of music, and it's not for everybody. And first listen, it can be quite confronting, especially some of those songs, David, that have the tuning that changes. And it sounds like the record has gone from 33 to 45 and back to 33. And it's like, oh, you know, it could be a nightmare for you, depending, but you just got to have an open mind. And once you know, sometimes the penny will drop. And it's a very much a headphones band, because there's little subtleties that you may not hear if you've got a, you know, not listening with the headphones. So, sorry, a bit long-winded, but that was my sort of first experience with my Bloody Valentine. So what I'm going to do is just shoot just some of the impressions of some of the songs, and yeah, maybe you can tell me some of the key tracks of this MBV album that dropped in 2013 and what you think of it. So
sure.
Maybe the first one called She Found Now. So that's the opening track. Again, it's got the change of the tuning. It's got the F-roll vocals. And I described it, it's got kind of a floating experience. A lot of their music is very dreamy. So you've got dream pop, but this is like dream rock, and it's just it's like the music just floats. And I actually looked up the lyrics, and the lyrics are very simple. And the construction of the lyrics on all of the songs off of My Bloody Valentine is not chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus. It's like verse, verse, verse. There is some choruses, but it's very structured in that way. And a lot of the lyrics are quite direct and simple, and may not make, it might come into the category of lyrics matching with music, but don't make a lot of sense in the cold light of day when you're reading it. And the lyrics to this one is, you come home and here I want you. I wonder how that you find out. So very simple lyrics. Do you have any thoughts on this track, or did you have any collective thoughts on She Found Now, the first track on the album?
Well, I do. There's a couple of things I have here about that track. And if I'll speak on them, and then I wanted to go back to a point that you had just brought up about the guitar sound. So She Found Now, I actually found out that this was the last song to be recorded for this album.
Oh, okay.
This entire album's recording process is a whole conversation to get into later on, but just for the sake of brevity, this was the only one that was recorded in 2012 when they were actually getting ready to release it. It came out in the beginning of February of 2013, right? So he said that it has a positive awakening vibe. When I heard Kevin Smith speak about this song, I think it feels like you're walking into a jacuzzi. Or you take a sip of alcohol that hits you, and then you're just like, it's a great, like, the way that warm guitar just sounds is it's similar to Loveless, but it's got this soft and almost quiet, because there's the distortion that's going on, but it seems like it's got a ceiling. It's subdued for some reason, on purpose, I think, to give it more of like a quiet reintroduction. That's how I feel about that song. Now, you had mentioned how it has the guitar sort of, what was the verb that you used, what the guitar does?
Oh, it sort of changes tuning. And I described the analogy like a record player changing the speed 45 to 33. Like, you know.
Yeah. Kevin Shields, just from my opinions on shoegaze is one of those terms that nobody asked for, but they got by some journalist, right? And it actually doesn't quite fit sometimes. I think that shoegaze and dream pop are just like sibling labels. To be analogous to a lot of your viewers might not, with classic rock, you have hard rock bands, right? But they'll always have like a ballad or like an acoustic song, a couple of them. A lot of times you're going to see shoegaze and dream pop have the same artist, because that's the light and shade. They either got the heavy guitar going on, or they have something that's atmospheric, and you can hear the vocals sometimes, but it doesn't have the loudness as much as it does the atmosphere. So you had a great point where you said that this is not verse, chorus, verse. This is more along the lines of the way that even prog rock is, where you have the initial pop music, like Tin Pan Alley is like, I see a scene and I see a group of people together. If I just start, playing bass, they'll start dancing. This is the opposite of that. This is where the actual jamming and the scene itself is from the music. They're not trying to make people dance or anything like that. So it's a very insular or isolated type of, you look at David Lee Roth running around on stage in the 80s, and then you see these guys that are just standing there, no stage presence at all, because they're just immersed in euphoria from just chug, 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 and it's going slow. So it has this very romantic, empathic vibe to it that I can get into later on. But the reason why the guitar sounds that way, unlike all the other shoegaze bands who usually use pedals, is because the band begun with a different lineup. So Kevin Shields wasn't even the lead guitarist and singer. And as soon as the original guy, it's like Syd Barrett and Piper of the Gates of Dawn or something like that, right? As soon as the original guy left, Kevin Shields just sort of went into that role, and Belinda Butcher came on to do vocals and do bass. They did songs during that point that year in '87 that just sounded kind of like The Cure. It was kind of like poppy songs, almost even like kind of the way that a lot of indie stuff, even you list Sally Cinnamon by the Stone Roses isn't even dream pop, but it still sort of fits into that pop. So they were doing that. And then one day Kevin just, he stated that they started to, without being conscious of it, not care about the way that the pop songs were performed. They didn't care how it was being sung perfect, and they started playing the songs more aggressively with the guitars. So when he went into the studio to record, I think it's either Feed Me With a Kiss in like '88, he happened to, by accident, touch a guitar that had its tremolo bar, also known as the whammy bar, very loosely detached from being in tune. So he realized by accident that if he bends the guitar and just keeps his fingers on the note, there's this resolve that happens where you make the note, you make the chord or whatever, it moves away, so it has this melting sound, and then it comes right back up in tune again for the next chord. And what Kevin described is that this makes an illusion to your ears, where if 50% of the time he's playing out of tune, but because there's always that resolve, your brain kind of like makes up for the spaces. Sort of like, you ever read one of those paragraphs that have some words just with the letters in a different area, but when you read it quick, you knew exactly what it was trying to say. Our brain just sort of fills in that gap of the note, and it has this weird dreamy effect. But that's why you get the guitar sound.
Yeah, look, that's well said. It's certainly, I mean, if that's the first song that you hear, and you're used to the very traditional rock structure, it can be confronting. But look, there's a lot of, I think this album is one that you've got to listen to a couple of times, and it definitely pays. There are some rewards. Another track I want to talk about, I don't know if you wanted to talk about this, is This and Yes. And my word is Astro Traveling. It's a very ambient song, and it's kind of interstellar. It's a musical experience. So not all of this album is wall of sound, heavy, with the, sort of the reverb and the distortion of the guitars. A lot of it is quite ambient. And this one is one of those ambient ones. There's keyboard chords, there's blips, and you've got those really sort of Julie Cruz F4 vocals. I'm saying Julie Cruz because that reminds me a little bit. It's kind of emotional, but at the same time, I was thinking when I put on the headphones, it reminded me this would be great as a soundtrack to the end of 2001. Remember, have you seen 2001? Kubrick, where it goes into the different dimension? That'll give some sort of a picture in everyone's mind of what this sort of sound of this interstellar song is. So My Bloody Valentine, as I said, just repeating myself, not just all the wall of guitar sound, but they had that sort of other ambient side to it. What's your views on this track?
Oh, well, this one, this is where it definitely sounds more modern because it has keyboards. I mean, I'm assuming it does, or that has synth guitar, but
it does. To me, it sounds like it's got keyboards, little blips, and yeah.
You don't really hear that on any of the songs prior to this release by that band. Nothing on the first three songs don't sound like on this album. Neither does anything else on the catalog have keyboards like that. Who does have keyboards is Slowdive, a contemporary of theirs. So
Yes.
I always think that sounds kind of slow divey. Brian Eno produced for Slow Dive.
Yeah.
So it definitely has that ambient. There's also this weird thing that happened with a lot of these shoegaze bands. By the time they hit the mid 90s, they started making almost like a trip hop type of sound. It happened with Slow Dive. It happened with a couple of other bands. They sort of really just sort of devolved into drum machine,
Drum
noise
and
and stuff like that. Yeah. And we can see that happening here too.
Yeah. There's one particular song that I'll do a shout out shortly that's very drum and bass. Yeah. All right. Another song I put a gold star next to it is probably my favorite. Is called New You. It's got a groove to it. It's got a bit of swing. It's the most, probably in my opinion, you may disagree, David, or the viewers, it's the most conventional song on the album. It's got this chiming tremolo guitar sound, which is really infectious. And I think it's the most sunny, one of the more sunny, upbeat, major chord melody songs on the album. Do you like this song?
Yeah. This fits in with what I was speaking about. We were speaking about the Is This and Yes track 4. There's this weird thing where I don't, because this is the third album. It's 3 songs broken up into thirds. It seems like intentional. The first 3 songs, the second 3 songs, and the last little arc there, Act 3, they all have a bit of a congruency to them. So yeah, that one definitely, Is This and Yes, If I Am, and Knew You, the middle 3, they definitely have a more, accessible and almost like a positive sense to it. If just because it's not as low, even though when I hear the songs at the beginning, it's not exactly like it's a depression, but it's just kind of low. You know what I mean? Some of this stuff sounds like it's being played underwater. That's kind of how My Bloody Valentine is a bit, So yeah, I love that they took these different excursions. Might I ask you this? Are you familiar with the band The Birthday Party?
Of course. Yes. Influence. I mean, Australia, Nick Cave.
Yeah, well, I'm the idiot that didn't know about them until today. And then I was like, they're from Melbourne. I'm like, he's gonna know who these people are.
Yeah, don't be too harsh on yourself. That's all right.
Yeah.
Look, there's lots of bands that come from Australia I haven't even heard of. So, but no, yes, definitely heard of The Birthday Party. And yes, there's a lineage.
He said that that the guitarist Roland Howard, this is paraphrasing him, he said he was truly a genius who had a way of approaching the guitar that was very different. I've always perceived it as very much like trying to tame a wild animal. And so
perfect summation. Yeah.
And that goes back to what you were saying about how the guitar they're really heavy into post-punk. So yeah, Joy Division, and even they were even aware of Dinosaur Jr. and Sonic Youth and such like beforehand. Yeah. So
but one thing that goes through with all their songs, it's this oscillating cycle, the wall of sound with the guitar, the rhythm. And it's just, as I said, the word is whirlwind. And it's right through most of their songs, all the guitar-orientated songs. Like the next track in sequence is In Another Way. And it's just the guitars are oscillating one to the other, but they're in a pattern. And then you go to another song, Nothing Is, where it's just a pummeling industrial riff repeated over and over again. Yeah. And for the 3 or so minutes, it's quite hypnotic. There's not much to it, but it's just a single pummeling industrial riff, and with the drumming. And over this, overlaid, you've got this Vangelis type keyboard line, but it all works. And it's, totally dreamy and hypnotic. Do you like that song, Nothing Is?
Oh, yeah. The last 3 songs on this album have a bit of a menace to them. And maybe much more the In Another Way track 7 and 8, Nothing Is. But I do. There was some stuff that I checked out Kevin Shields' interview with, that he had quite a bit to speak about those 3 songs in particular. There's definitely a drum and bass influence going on, and he basically well, when they were trying to record when they were just recording in 1995, Debbie, I don't know how to say her last name, but the bassist and Calm, the drummer, they left because the band was kind of not functioning anymore. So this album was started with just these little inklings of recordings that he just put together as abstracts in 1996. And then he just stopped and the band went into a large hibernation period. A lot of people, I think that because there's a very drum and bass element to those 3 songs, you can see the framework that was started, because that was really, like you think of like even what was going on in late 96, that drum and bass stuff was all over the place. You had the Aphex Twin, you had David Bowie's like Earth, you know what I mean? All that. Was that the name of the album, Earthling? The one where he's got I'm Not Afraid of Americans, like,
yes.
on it? Yeah.
Yep.
9 Inch Nails was on, you know what I mean? So there was a lot of drum and bass going on.
In the club scene, drum and bass was just huge. So, since the recording of the Loveless onwards, there was a lot happening in the dance music culture. And, drum and bass, trip hop, etc.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
But Wonder 2 is the song, the last song on the album, and that's definitely, I wrote down shoegaze meets drum and bass. And in the concert, this was loud. I cannot sort of tell you how loud this was. Even with the the ear protection, you could hear it. I wouldn't dare. It'd be like putting your head in a 747 engine. And it's quite dense. And putting it on the headphones, it's multi-layered. There is so much happening in this song, David. It's so layered. And Shields being quite a perfectionist, because reading interviews and a lot of My Bloody Valentine story, he portrays himself as a very, has a lot of finesse, a lot of perfection. And this would have, I could imagine they would have taken a while putting this down. Vocals very low in the mix. There's just so much happening. It's a signature song. It's a great finale. And I think this really, it's one of the star tracks on the album, Wonder 2. Do you like this song?
Oh, yeah. Again, we have like, the first 3 songs is kind of like revisiting. They could almost be, if you told people that were just studio tracks left over from Loveless, anybody would buy that, because it sounds exactly like that. Then they go off into these 3 that are kind of experimental from before, but sound modern. And then they go into these other 3 that are not as light, but they're darker. They seem like the darkest things that My Bloody Valentine has ever come out with. Like Nothing Is, and even like The Way Wonder. That last little third there is kind of, well, they always want to sound different, right? That's sort of the whole point with why they didn't release anything for 20 years. It seems like he's not in a rush to release stuff. He would rather just stay and meticulously like put everything in its right place. I can understand that when they did this, there was going to be a lot of 2012, 2011, when he was putting it together, they were putting it together, that was going to get influence on this, even though the abstracts here date back to 1996.
Yeah, and especially when he's sitting back and looking at all the bands that, indirectly he's inspired, as we talked about, even some of the major acts that were breakthrough in the alternative grunge genre, like Nirvana, Garbage, lesser extent. Another band that sort of comes to mind when I was listening to this is Sonic Youth. Sort of similar with, doing a lot of sort of experimentation with sound, distortion,
Yeah.
parallel careers.
Yeah.
So I think both bands, I don't know, I'm pretty sure My Bloody Valentine would have been looking, over the shoulder at what they were doing, whether a direct influence. But to me, those two bands seem kind of similar. But, Sonic Youth were a bit more, not, you can't really say they were kind of shoegaze in respect to the vocals are very much pushed up, but they're in respect of the soundscape and sonically kind of a similar wheelhouse. What do you think?
Oh, Kevin Shields directly cited Sonic Youth and Dinosaur Jr. when they were like out in 86, 87 as influences on them.
Yeah.
So maybe they did a little bit of a quid pro there. Yeah. I don't see the I'm surprised you say of course you're entitled to your opinion, but I'm surprised you would say Nirvana would be a sort of have some congruency here.
Yeah, I think with the distortion.
Yeah,
I think with the distortion and grunge, because basically this whole shoegaze was a melding of indie and alternate, and definitely I think there was definitely some sort of influence in regards to them sonically. Song structure, not. If you look at that band, the three of them, they are a melting pot of various influence, even classic rock, metal. But I think there is some shoegaze and there is some definite sort of influence with My Bloody Valentine. But hey, I might be a little bit contrarian there.
No, but you're actually on a good point there, Peter, because you're actually making a point that I was going to make. I read a lot about how Kevin Shields was actually born in America. His family is Irish, but he was born here. And he went back to Ireland when he was about 10 in the 70s. So he embraced youth culture and youth music when he was in Ireland. And he said that it was much more pronounced there than it was in America for him. So he got into glam and he got into a lot of pop and rock with melodies and whatnot. You're right on the money when you're talking about, I mean, I'm over there like putting my foot in my mouth, but you're right on the money when you're talking about Nirvana, because one of the things that separates My Bloody Valentine from some of these other shoegaze groups that directly are influenced by a Public Image Limited or a Joy Division or anything post-punk in general is that, like Nirvana, they're pop-based group. And you can tell how My Bloody Valentine were a pop-based group because of the songs that they were doing that sounded kind of like the like the Smiths and the Cure and everything like that.
Like this band, right? Pop. Yeah. You can hear a lot of sunny pop, but it's through the prism of shoegaze because it has the characteristics of the distortion. The vocals are not your traditional classic rock vocals. This is definitely their second album is definitely worth investigating. Going blank again. Yeah.
They're big into Buffalo Springfield, the Byrds, Haight Ashbury,
Sunny,
Crosby, Stills, Nash,
and you go back a little bit further, the Velvet Underground. I've said this, and I did recently had a discussion with Martin Popoff, and I said that the Velvet Underground in that first album probably inspired millions of bands. Didn't sell much, but the impact on music cannot be measured. And when with My Bloody Valentine, take away the fuzz, take away the blur, listen to the music. If you stripped it back, you would hear melody lines that would be clearly in the domain of a Velvet Underground album.
I mean, find me an indie band that doesn't have the pedigree of Velvet Underground. It's almost like everything's there. Can always get so seminal, right? I'm glad you brought that up because you kind of like proved me wrong in the middle of me talking. I was like,
that's all right.
They do have that melodic. There is the melodic center that goes on the core. Yeah, right on.
Yeah, no. But oral viewers, as I said, this type of music may not be for you, but give it a listen. Give it a couple of listens. It does pay rewards. You've just got to keep a kind of an open mind. But look, David, this has really been fun talking about this particular band, My Bloody Valentine. I definitely think this is a classic of the genre. And, it's one of probably the great albums of the 1990s. And I'm going to probably buy a ticket to see Ride. They're coming out to Australia, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. And I might put a review, might get you on the show, and we might do Ride.
I'm down.
Yeah, great. All right. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell us what you think. Maybe you disagree. Tell us what you think about My Bloody Valentine and me and David. We'll do a show pretty soon. Cheers. See ya.